Hello, good morning. My name is Deborah Duggan. I'm a member of Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild, and I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Dick Allgire. He's the Vice President of Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild, and he's also a viewer and a teacher. Here's Dick.
All right, thank you, Deborah. Deborah also is a very fine viewer, and we're going to see some of her work in this presentation. I've been involved with remote viewing for over 10 years. I've been obsessed with it. I do it every chance I can. I've done a lot of sessions. I've trained a lot of students. I've been involved in a lot of projects. And to me, remote viewing is the most interesting thing I've ever been involved with, and perhaps the most important. Now, in my real life, on my daily job, I'm a television newscaster. That's an important job, and it's an interesting job, and it's a very glamorous job, too. Really glamorous. I'll tell you some of the glamorous stories I've been involved with. I got to cover the largest, the biggest ever sewage spill in the history. Oh, you can laugh, right? The biggest sewage spill in the history of Oahu, perhaps the biggest one in the history of the United States. This was 80 million gallons of raw sewage. I don't know if you can get your... Not a target that you'd want to give to a remote viewer that you'd want to keep as a friend, but I got to do the live reports from that sewage spill. It was awful glamorous. I got to talk to the chief of wastewater management one-on-one. If you want a glamorous job. This is a man, he's in charge of the whole sewer system for Oahu. He's a man who lives in abject fear of Super Bowl Sunday. Explain why. And he explained this to me while we were standing in 80,000 gallons of sewage. He says, first half, everybody's drinking Bud Light. And when the whistle sounds at halftime, I'm so scared it taxes the system and almost overloads the system. So, glamorous job being a TV newscaster. I get to wear makeup, and because I'm on TV, can't challenge my masculinity, but I look great in makeup. That's a true story, by the way. I did cover the sewage spill. Another true story, I once worked a Target where I was working with pen and paper, and I did a thing we call priming. This is a way to drive your awareness down, priming, where I was watching a lazy river of granular blackness flowing by, and I went into a state where I suddenly awoke, and I was in the middle of the ocean. And we have some fantastic video equipment in TV news. High-definition TV is really something, but nothing compared to the experience of awaking on target to 360 degrees around me. There was blue ocean, the blue of deep ocean, puffy clouds in the sky, a sunny day, and all of a sudden, sputtering in came an airplane about like from here to there, threw up a big plume of water, and it so shocked me, it was so startling, that I woke up and I was in a reclining chair working a session. It had just startled me off target. The target cue for that one was the next search and rescue event, Honolulu Coast Guard, Barbers Point Station. So I drew my sketches and submitted my session, went on to other things. About a week or 10 days later, I was on the news, on TV, and I was reading a story. The Honolulu Coast Guard is searching for a small plane that ditched in the ocean 120 miles northeast of the island of Oahu. I had that realization while I was, my God, that's the session I worked. And I had worked it about 10 days prior to it happening. That'll screw your head on differently. Okay, we're the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild. We're from Hawaii. That's the prominent feature on the island of Oahu, Diamond Head. Many people take pictures of that. If you go about 12 miles that direction, you're going to run out of land. You're going to be in the ocean. You can go maybe 35, 40 miles that direction, you're going to run out of land. You're going to be in the ocean, unless you have a boat or you're swimming. Maybe 25 to 30 miles that direction. So it's a small place. It's a rock. It's good because it's a quiet place to remote view, surrounded by ocean. But what's really good is training remote viewers there, and we've been doing it. Glenn Wheaton's been doing it for over 10 years. And we meet weekly. I've been meeting with Glenn for 10 years every week. And I'm still learning something new every week. But we have the advantage of having a group of viewers that's in one small location. It's not like we go to a city and charge people and give them a one-week introductory class and then they go to Des Moines or they go to Detroit or they go to Phoenix or they go to Florida. You have a viewer that's all alone. What can they do? It's much easier when you have a group that's assembled together. Now, I've been, I know, sometimes a bit annoying over the years, and our group has too, to an extent, on some of the bulletin boards and some of the chats and some of the discussion forums. We like to say, show us your data, show us a whole session, show us an entire session that is unedited. So yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to show you some pictures here today, okay? Before we get onto this, we need to talk about what is remote viewing. When I went to my boss, and I didn't have any vacation time left, and I said, Todd, I've been invited to go to a conference in Las Vegas, and it's an important conference, and I'd like to go. And he said, oh, a conference, what's it about? I said, oh, it's remote viewing. What was that? It's remote viewing. Oh, remote viewing, is that like they have a satellite with infrared imagery on the ground or something? I said, no. So when you tell your wife, honey, I'm going to Las Vegas, but I'm staying in a hotel that doesn't have gambling or smoking, right? For remote viewing, what do you tell your wife? What do you tell your friends? What is remote viewing? Well, here's our definition at HRVG. Remote viewing, it's an advanced communication skill. It's not psychic hocus pocus. It's not of the devil. It's not telepathic. It's an advanced communication skill. Our definition is the goal is to create and maintain a pathway between the alert mind and the subconscious so that you can, on demand, have moments of non-local awareness. Now, there's a dirty little secret in the remote viewing community. That is, a lot of people remote view front-loaded. Front-loading means you're told what the target is. If I told you, well, remote view Disneyland, you know it's Disneyland, it's not very remarkable if you come back with, mouse ears and a castle and a roller coaster in a mountain. At our group, there's no front-loading. We don't front-load. We work completely blind or double blind. So what we get is we create a target ID and a target envelope. And that's all the viewer is given, is the target ID. Someone else retains custody of the envelope. And this is a target ID. We use either numbers or letters or a combination of numbers and letters. We always remote view blind or double blind. This is our website, www.hrvg.org. We were founded in 1997. This is the longest continuous running remote viewing related website. We have more published sessions, projects, predictions, proof of performance, and the most discussion. We've trained viewers worldwide, although our core group is in Hawaii. We've trained certified instructors. We've trained analysts, and analysis, as I spoke at the last 2 conferences ago, is very important. And we have the best parties. Now, that's not a joke. There's a reason for that. And here's some pictures of our parties. This is Glenn on the barbecue right there. We have some great food. On Glenn's birthday, we gave him a shotgun. He won't accept any money for instruction, but we got him a birthday party. And we have people come and visit us. Courtney Brown visited. Skip Atwater came. You're all invited. We'll throw a luau for you. But there's a reason we have parties. Because when you remote view with someone week after week after week, when you sit down there and once we start getting to the really interesting and operational targets, a target could be anything. So you've got to be willing to say anything and put your data out in front of the whole group and not be afraid of being judged or being deemed crazy. You've got to communicate with your subconscious and be willing to put whatever your subconscious gives you. It's almost like week after week standing up there, and getting naked in front of everybody. So we have a camaraderie, we have a trust, we like each other. We went to the roulette table last night, our group, and we had a party, and we dominated randomness. It was fun. Okay, that's our founder, Glenn Wheaton. Glenn Wheaton was a Green Beret. He was in Special Forces Intelligence. He was a part of a military remote viewing that was separate from the Fort Meade unit. He did it for many years, and our methodology is based on what he and the 10th Special Forces Group developed. Now, here's the way I see Glenn. Glenn has a roulette wheel in his living room, and we go there and we play roulette, and he's looking at you like that in class. This is from an actual class. He's got a little bit of leprechaun in him. He's Irish. He's a shaman. He's a magician and a wizard, and he's the most brilliant person I've ever met. And if you get a chance to talk to him in the hall, ask him anything about remote viewing and just have a conversation with him. We'll be glad you did. But we're getting into some deep stuff, like how to control randomness, how to send a message across time. Those are the notes on the blackboard, and I transcribed my notes from this actual class. Movement in time is an engagement of consciousness, not time. Time and consciousness are closely related. Time is consciousness observing. You can't have time without consciousness making an observation. That's deep, and that would be an interesting presentation, but I'm going to get into more of the nuts and bolts in this presentation. A little bit more about Glenn. This was his teacher. That's a scary... Glenn said this man scared the crap out of him. That's Colonel Robert L. Howard, Green Beret Medal of Honor winner. And this is the man that taught Glenn the black arts. There was another man that was important to Glenn and to remote viewing and to our methodology, and that's Dr. Richard Ireland. I believe Dr. Richard Ireland was one of the greatest psychics and one of the greatest remote viewers ever. And the 10th Special Forces Group got introduced to him. And what they did together has still not been declassified, but I know a little bit about what happened. I know that they tested Dr. Ireland, and they sealed his face completely shut. They plaster of Paris closed his eyes, literally, so no light could get in. And then they took a $100 bill and held it up over here, and he read the serial number. He recited the serial number off the bill. Glenn did it to him one time, and he recited letters and numbers, and Glenn said, "That's not right." And he said, "No, read it backwards." He could recite the numbers backwards. He was an amazing man, and he is the source of our methodology. They back-engineered what he did. So they asked him, the 10th Special Forces remote viewers, how do you do that? And one of the things he said was, there's a place I use that I call blackboard. Blackboard. This is a term that you'll hear and see in Hawaii remote viewing methodology. Blackboard. It's a place that we train ourselves to put visuals. Because at HRVG, the first thing we do is we close our eyes and we acquire visual imagery by looking on blackboard. 80% of what we see, of what we perceive about the world around us, is visual information. You can look at that right away and know most of what there is to know about it. Your visual imagery is very important. But we need a structured and disciplined method to keep our mind focused on the task of collecting data. It's very structured. It's very disciplined. Now, those of you who are in intelligence, Lynn Buchanan, Paul Smith, Ed Dames when he comes, will recognize this, the U.S. Army Intelligence Salute Report process. This is how we name our S1, S2, S3. It's based on S1 size, S2 activity, S3 location, S4 unit. So when I say this is S3, it's not stage 3, it's S3 based on location from the Salute Report. This was, after all, developed by a military unit. Okay, this is what our session looks like. This is a quick overview. We begin with S1, and that consists of a visual ideogram, spontaneous ideograms, and something we call Playfair. Playfair. Playfair isn't just a catchy name or a marketing tool used to sell DVDs. Playfair is the intriguing puzzle playland, and I'm going to get into that in depth in a minute. S2 consists of Nemo Playfair. This is a data matrix and phonics. S3 is a site sketch or a data consolidation. S4 we call cascade, and there's a reason we call it cascade, and I'll discuss that momentarily. S4 cascade consists of a legend, cascade what we call galleys, and a rush, which is a full-page sketch of each individual gestalt. After S4, we move to edging and priming. Again, these aren't catchy terms or marketing tools. Edging is an important method of cooling your consciousness down. Priming is the gateway to ERV. Takes us to S5, which is the extended or experiential part of our session. And that's Deborah, who introduced me in an actual session. We'll see more of that later. And finally, S6, when you come out of your experiential and your theta altered state, this is the reporting phase, S6. So those are the various phases of what we do. If you've ever seen a tea ceremony, and I got to see a tea master, at the tea ceremony they have a table set up, and there's a bowl and a whisk, and there's a cloth, and there are all the implements and the pour. And each thing has its important place on the table, and the tea Grand Master does everything with exacting precision and meaning and intent. There's a way that they pick up the cloth, and there's a way they wipe the bowl the same way every time. And part of the art of the way of the tea is the way they do that. And likewise, our remote viewing session unfolds, beginning with the way you set your desk up. This is a neurolinguistic programming communication cue to your subconscious. We don't remote view on a desk with a Coke half drunk or a bag of chips, and you don't put your purse on the desk. When we trained with Glenn, he would stand at the beginning of the class at the head of the room and say, "I'll know you when you're ready, when your desks are set." And so the way that the pen is placed, the way the paper is there positioned on the paper, all of this is a cue to your subconscious. The cueing and the pathway has begun once you see this. Here's a caveat. I'm not training you how to do this. I gave a presentation at one of these conferences a few years ago on determining location, and I was shocked to see it being sold as learn how to determine location. So I'll look into the camera right now and say, if you've bought this video as a how-to, contact me. You've been ripped off. This is like at the baseball game, they say, this is for the sole use of our private audience, not intended to be rebroadcast or blah, blah, blah. So I'm not teaching you how to do the remote viewing session. I'm only addressing the theory. Okay, let's start with S1 visual ideogram. Visual ideogram. We're not looking in our mind's eye. What we're doing is training our subconscious to always put imagery in a specific place on Blackboard. That is a specific place, and there's a specific way we look. I trained a group of remote viewers, brand new novice viewers, in Seoul, South Korea when I gave a lecture at a conference there, a scientific conference. And it was very interesting because a lot of them didn't speak English. They were very bright. They were very determined to learn this. And I had to explain things like communicate subconscious awareness, spontaneous ideogram through a Korean interpreter. That was a hard day. It was a long day. But it was very successful. After just about an hour of instruction, I gave them some targets. And this is their first 3 seconds of visual capture. This is like 3 seconds of communication with your subconscious. The target was a balloon race in Reno, Nevada, and one of my Korean students drew that. Excellent work. I gave them a target which was the S2 stealth bomber. After 3 seconds of visual acquiring data by the subconscious on Blackboard, drew that. Very good. I gave them an atomic bomb going off. Pretty high impact target. Drew the mushroom cloud. And we know, as analysts from looking at that just the way that is drawn, that comes from the subconscious in that 2.5 to 3 seconds that they look. This wasn't the Korean class. This was a submarine on land with a person standing in front of it, and that's a pretty good capture for the first 3 seconds of your session. I'm teaching a student in Indiana over the internet. I've never met him. I send him a DVD. I teach him via email. He zips his files to me. And he's doing quite well. Target was the Hollywood Bowl. And you can see the lights, the way they're playing there. That's a good visual representation, again, first couple seconds of looking on blackboard. Again, back to the Koreans. This one really knocked me out in that one-day class. You can see it's a guy scoring a goal and at a soccer game, and he drew the net and the guy scoring the goal. That was a big hit. The first thing he did in the session. Miss Ann, would you stand up briefly, right back here from the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild? This is one of our shy students. Thank you, Ann. Sit down. She did this work. A plane in World War II, over 60 years ago, crashed into the Ko'olau Mountains of Oahu. And a couple of years ago, they had a recovery effort. They were finally going to go try to find the remains, and they located the aircraft. So I tasked it as a target, gave it to the guild, blind. And this was Ann's visual ideogram. The plane crashed about there at the 2,000-foot level, and she writes here, artifacts. She did another visual ideogram. Near that location is the H3 freeway with a tunnel, which she drew the curving. Very good, Ann. That's good work for the first thing she did in the session. That's about, the first minute of work. Now, there are some who will say, you can't close your eyes and look at the target, because if you close your eyes and look at the target, well, that just invites imagination. Any visuals you get are to be discounted as just imagination. Well, there's a rule we have. The signal line visual imagery versus imagination. How does that work? Well, there's a 1.5-second rule, because we only look for a second and a half. If I don't really have time to do this today, but if I brought a volunteer up and I said, okay, I want you to close your eyes. You can do this in the audience if you want, but I want you to visualize in your mind's eye two clowns in purple polka-dotted silk fluffy suits with orange hair and a red nose riding a unicycle and going up a ramp and doing a loop-de-loop on that unicycle. It would take you about 4, 5, 6 seconds to build that mental image, because that's imagination. But if you're trained to look on Blackboard in our method for 1.5 seconds, anything you get in that initial flash isn't imagination. Imagination doesn't have enough time to create its target imagery. So we must do this fast, and that's why the method has to be so structured. Okay, moving now to spontaneous ideogram. And many different methods of remote viewing teach spontaneous ideograms. I remember when I first learned from Dr. Courtney Brown, he taught me up and over is a structure, across is land, wavy is water, looping energy, okay? But spontaneous ideograms seem to be falling out of favor in the remote viewing world. I'd heard there's some talk that they may even be discontinued. The poor ideograms seem to get no respect. Now, we know that we describe the motion of the ideogram, curving up, looping over, curving downward, but it's misunderstood, it's neglected, it's ignored, and discarded. What do you do with it then? We do a lot with our visual ideograms. This is a page from an actual session, and when I look at that, that has what we call in Hawaii mana. That's the real thing. That's a real target, in that the viewer has expressed that as an ideogram and probed it to get data. What it is the recovery of gestaltic data as expressed in physical action. The way we do that is we probe the ideogram, hopefully with the instrument that created it. But I could give that visual ideogram that I created to Deborah or to Ann or Glenn or Jason or any of our viewers, and they could probe it, and they could extract data from it. It's sort of like, remember the days, I played that music on an MP3 file, and then they have CDs, but back in the day, and a lot of us are old enough, records. They used to play some music, and they would inscribe the sound of the band playing onto a physical medium, in the etches of the wax and the vinyl. And then you could place a stylus on it and recover that information and play the music back. And it's the same with ideograms. When you make an ideogram, you express the gestaltic data, you can probe it and recover it. The first thing we recover, it's under the heading PL Probe Legend, is a simple yet important aspect of the target, Is the target simplex or complex? Is there a lot of data at the target, or is there not much data at the target? Now, this would be a simplex target, a bulb of garlic on a cutting board. A target I wouldn't give to an advanced remote viewer who was going to sit down and work for an hour, but a beginning student who was just trying to determine if it was simplex or complex, this might be important. So you could express that simplicity in an ideogram and probe it and know that the target is simplex. Likewise, if the target were O'Hare Airport, a complex place with a lot going on, there's buses and trains and cars and people coming and going and baggage being moved around and computers and planes taking off, you can express that in an ideogram and probe that and determine that the target is complex. It is data that's very low level but very important early on. Next, we go for the feel of the target. Is it hard or semi-hard, soft, semi-hard? Similar to other methodologies. We then probe to determine what created the target. This is an intermediate probe. Is it man-made? Is it natural? Is it artificial? Artificial would be made but not by man, a beehive, spider's web, beaver dam. And finally, we probe to determine the state of the target. Is it static or dynamic? Is it moving or is it at rest? Is it on or is it off? Is it active or inactive? Again, low-level data, but very important data when you begin to assemble your information about the target. So here's a target. Let's say if it was a guy crossing the finish line at the New York Marathon. You could express that target as a spontaneous ideogram, probe it, and determine that the target is complex, semi-soft, natural, and dynamic. But we're not done with the ideograms yet. We can squeeze a lot more out of that lemon of an ideogram because we use the ideograms and we probe the ideograms in Playfair. And Playfair is our method of solving the puzzle. You know, Skip Atwater once described remote viewing as flashing a pen light in a darkened room for 1 second. So you might say that, well, it's open and airy, it's a large space, but it's brown. But there's something crystalline. There's a sound of a man's voice. But is the brown thing the sound of the man's voice? How's the crystalline thing relate to the big thing? It seemed too just disjointed. So we have a method that is a bit more logical, and it's called Playfair. Playfair was named after a World War II cryptologist named Meriwether Playfair. In Playfair, we're assembling the puzzle with a natural and logical progression of data. Let's say that I found myself placed in the Kalahari, and I was walking along with the Bushmen of the Kalahari, and I saw something in the distance, and it was an elephant. Well, how would blind men, there's the old parable of how blind men describe an elephant. One guy pulls on the tail, says it's a rope, and the other says it's a wall. They all have a different impression. But if I were walking through the Kalahari, the first sense that would engage in the natural human being as he's in his environment would be sight. So let's say you see something in the distance. That's what we do in Playfair. We first probe the ideogram and obtain a sight. Now the viewer might not know what that is and just draw it as a vague shape. But we know that that's the first sight and the first contact with target visually. Okay, as you're walking along through the savannah and you get a little closer, the next sense that will engage is your hearing. You'll hear a sound, and the viewer approaches the target the same way, knowing that they're probing to know, okay, I saw that thing. What sound does it make? Well, it might make a crunching and trumpeting sound. But you know that that sound is associated with that. As you continue on, getting closer to whatever that was, you might get a smell or a taste. And that's the next sense that we kick into play in Playfair. You might smell grass, manure, and dung, knowing that it is the smell of that thing that you saw. So you're logically progressing. All the data is related in that line. This is called a Playfair galley. So you get closer still, and you can feel the temperature, which in this case would be warm. But you know that the warm temperature is emanating from that thing that you drew. And you get closer still, and you feel the texture. And you know that the texture of that thing that you saw is rough and leathery. So every bit of data on this line describes that site. It's all interconnected. It's very easy for the analyst to do the analysis on this, and it keeps the viewer on track. Now, the viewer's moving. What I just told you there, it takes about 20, 30 seconds. It's rapid fire. Every posture, every eye movement, every motion of the pen is predetermined to trigger communication with the subconscious. Okay? That's Playfair, and you can do a whole sheet of Playfair depending on whether the target is complex or simplex. Next we go to S2 Nemo Playfair. This is what a page of Nemo Playfair looks like. That's an actual session worked recently. And that's the Nemo guy. You may have seen it right there. You can see the probe marks. The data is, again, produced in a logical sight, sound, smells, taste, all relating back to what that site was. But we employ this little probing icon. It's based on neurolinguistic programming. We call this a neuro-interrogation mask overlay. Our pet name is Nemo. And Nemo is your subconscious overlaid over your face. Nemo is the way we communicate with our subconscious at S2. At S2, your sub is all over the target. Your sub knows everything about the target. You just need to prompt yourself to recall what your subconscious knows. And this is how we use neurolinguistic programming. If I was to ask young Shane here, Shane, what color was your first car? In recalling that, her eyes would instinctively, automatically dart up and to the left. She wouldn't think, oh, my first car, well, let me look up and to the left. She would just recall that, and her eyes would just momentarily dart up. We know that from neurolinguistic programming because up and to the left is visual recall. If I was to ask young Shane, remember the sound of your mother's voice. In doing so, to recall that, she would dart over to the left ever so quickly, involuntarily and unconsciously, because we know that over and to the left is audio recall. And if I was to ask Shane, Shane, remember how you felt when you broke up with your boyfriend, how sad you were. And as she remembered that kinesthetic, that emotional, that conceptual feel of sadness, her eyes would dart down and to the left, because down and to the left is kinesthetic recall. These are some, I recorded the Ken Burns World War II movie, War, and I grabbed some still frames. This was a veteran of World War II recalling his experiences in battle. And you can see his eyes. He's recalling visual recall by the NLP of it, of his posture. Here's another veteran who was recalling the horrors of the Bataan Death March, and his eyes are darting to recall. So how do we use that? What we do at HRVG is we reverse and use that body language to emulate the target and prompt our subconscious to communicate target data. So as you're probing Nemo, your eyes are darting up and to the left, and you're obtaining visual recall, audio recall. It took me many months, as Glenn taught me this, to really understand this and learn to use it. But once I figured it out and used it, this is just an amazing, incredible tool. Okay, here's a line of actual data where you can see I've probed for visual recall, audio recall, probed here for smells and taste, here for kinesthetic. And there's a line on the galley after sight, sound, smells, taste, temps, P, which some might call a guided deduction. P, you know, I was working this target and I knew it was a structure that was a big stone structure and it was outdoors, but there was some cloth in front of it. And I didn't think of it as a, you know, you can't stop and think of this analytically. You've got to move so fast. So the P, the phase line, is just a way to dump this, just write it down and get rid of it, so I wrote cloth overhang. And that was the target. Now we move to S3, which is a data consolidation or site sketch. By now you've been working, 20 minutes or so. You've produced a few pages of data. And the foundation of a good session is, we believe, number one, perceiving visual imagery. Number two, identifying the primary gestalts. In any remote viewing session, you've got to identify the primary gestalts that are at the target. And then in S3, you assemble those gestalts in their proper relationship. Okay? Here are your pages of data, visual ideogram, spontaneous ideogram, Playfair, Nemo Playfair, and some phonics. And what the viewer does is takes a clean piece of paper and intuitively assembles that data onto just one page to identify the gestalts and their relationships. So, if you had seen a big structure and you knew there was some land there and you'd perceived a stairway and some people, well, it just felt right to draw the stone structure with some kind of columns, and the fabric just feels like it goes there, and the stairway just is okay, I put that there, some people. So that's the target, and that's how the S3 matches up with the target, the gestalts of structure, of land, and humans. Also threw in the columns, the fabric, and the stairway. That brings us to S4 Cascade. In S4 Cascade, we look at each gestalt individually. We identify all the major gestalts at the target. We take our S3, and what we're looking for is their land. Represented in the S3 is their air, water, structure, energy, obstacle, life vegetation, life human, life other. So in this target, yeah, land, there's land there, so put down land 1. Air doesn't seem important. I'm not going to look at that. Water, there seems to be some water there, so give water a 1 in the legend. And structure, energy. Now we're going to move to some new clean pages after we've identified all of these and listed them in our Cascade legend. We go after them one after another. So we've got to mention that by now, by S4, when you begin the session, you're in a beta state. You're in an alert, very conscious, hyper-alert state. That's why you only get a second and a half. You've got to work very quickly. By S4, you've been working maybe 30, 40 minutes. You're getting caught up in the target. It's like when you start reading a book, you're aware of turning the pages and reading the sentences. But when you're caught up in the story, pretty soon, you're just reading. You're just involved in the story. You're not knowing you're reading. You're just following the narrative. Likewise, by the time you get to S4, you're caught up in the target and you have a lot longer dwell time. So you take a clean sheet of paper with Blackboard because you're going to look on Blackboard. You're going to place each gestalt on Blackboard and look at it, and you have a Nemo probing icon. In this case, what's the water? What's the water that we saw at that S3? So your intent is to isolate the water gestalt and look at it. So the viewer can go to Target, go to Blackboard for 10, 12, 15 seconds. We have a method to keep imagination at bay. There's a thing we do that keeps the primary consciousness engaged while the subconscious is communicating the data. So the viewer might draw this representation of water. It's difficult to draw something like that and not want to get more impressions and know more about it, so we use the probing icon in S4, our old friend Nemo, to gather some impressions by going back to recall where we were when we were there on Blackboard. And the viewer might realize that it's rust-colored, might sense a sound of trickling, the sound of machinery through metal, might realize that this has a metallic smell or a chemical taste, and might realize that sometimes the water trickles, and other times it just rushes out, and it's a waste product, and it's warm, and it pools, and see, the data just starts cascading out of you when you get this level of target contact in S4. Okay? You've done the water. Now let's move to, say, the humans. You're going to take a new clean sheet of paper, and you're going to take a new Nemo galley and look at the humans. Isolate the humans. Again, the viewer will go to Blackboard for 12 to 15 seconds. Immediately draw their impressions of what they saw and perceived on Blackboard. It might look something like that. Go back to the probing icon and realize that these are men in work clothes and denim that get their hands dirty. They're talking, but they're not in English. Again, this begins cascading out of you. They have sweat and grime. They go in a special gate. They're transported here by bus. They're low paid. They're working class, but they're glad to have this job. That's the type of data that comes out in Cascade. A lot of people that I've taught that have learned other methods say, well, you know, I've heard that HRVG does get some visuals, but you know, what about the complex conceptual data? Well, this is the point in the session where we begin to get extremely complex conceptual data. Because we live by Law 1 at HRVG. If any sensory data may be obtained via remote viewing, then any and all sensory data may be obtained. If you can get wavy across and it's water, you can know everything that you need to know about that water. If your intent and focus, methodology is good enough. Some will represent that as a human. Say, okay, the target was a human, that's a hit. A lot of people draw stick figures. I've drawn a lot of stick figures in a lot of sessions. But if it's human and you can realize via subconscious communication, via non-local awareness that it's a human, why not know everything about that person? We had a researcher from Japan visit us, Dr. Hideyuki Kukubo from the Japan Bioemissions Laboratory, came to our headquarters, had a video camera, was following us around looking at sessions, and I had to go to work. I left, and he caught Glenn alone, and he said, "Please." And he handed Glenn a target envelope, said, "You work, please." And he had the camera rolling, so Glenn, okay, sat down and worked a target. The guy captured it on video in real time. And the target was a Japanese lady, and that's what Glenn drew. Told us about her life and how many sons she had and that she had back pain and what kind of clothes she was wearing. That's the type of target contact you can get. Now we move beyond pen and paper. At the end of S4 Cascade, you've been working 45 minutes an hour. You may have more than 20 pages of data. Now is the point in our session where we put down the pen, put the paper aside, and we move to the altered state version of the session, and it's all one continuum. We do an exercise called edging. Edging. Edging is a way to quiet the noise of your own physical body and quiet the noise of the location around you and amplify the signal line. And I love when I get to edging because I always get a flurry of visuals. Now, many people have used techniques to lower their consciousness and lower the noise. Monks might be chanting, but I'll tell you what they're doing. By chanting, you're blowing out more than you're blowing in, and you're off-gassing CO2 because the urge to breathe is not a product of a buildup of oxygen. It's a buildup of CO2, and if you off-gas CO2, you lose the urge to breathe, and you can come to a complete stop and be in an altered state. And it's kind of what that is, but I'll tell you that a bunch of Green Berets are not going to admit, they're not going to sit there in robes and chant. They're not going to admit that that's what they do because they can't tell the colonel, well, we're going to go chant for a while. So they call it edging. It's off-gassing, and there's a way that we block our optic nerve slightly and assume a very comfortable position and do a breathing exercise. It's called edging. Edging brings you to a complete stop, and that's where the signal line becomes amplified. It was about 18 months of training before Glenn stood in front of my class and used the word edging. And I remember that night well. We had a strong foundation in the paper and pen part of the session before he ever mentioned this. And edging is the gateway to priming. And priming is a way to drive yourself into a theta state. And that's where you get real target contact. This is S5 in our methodology. We call it S5 isolation when you do it alone, or S5 Morpheus when you're monitored. There's Deborah. When you're going to S5, you can put some, we have some CDs that induce theta brainwaves. We'll put on a mask, quiet things down. We have a microphone, and the monitor is recording everything she says and does. What we're trying to achieve is something we call an inclined orbit at theta. When you're at theta, it's that place just before you fall asleep where you're still a little bit consciousness, but it's a gateway to kick off a lot of interesting experiences, and then there where the real interesting remote viewing can happen. So the viewer is going down to theta, and the monitor then asks them a question based only on data that they've produced. And the viewer, in reporting that data, comes up, it brings them up, it uses enough of their conscious mind that it brings them up out of theta. So the monitor is watching them again as they continue the priming exercise and go back down and knows when the viewer's in theta. You can query them again. And a good monitor and a good viewer can continue this inclined orbit at theta for 15, 20 minutes and get remarkable data. This is some work I did in S5 with my eyes closed. Came back, wrote myself a little note so I could remember what it was I'd seen, because it was a building. And it had a lot of stories, and a lot of people came to visit it. And I knew that this place is all about its past. It has a history that is actually, it felt like the structure had become its past. Its only purpose was now its past. It's a people, and the people come here to witness and learn about that past and just seep themselves into history. As I went back down at another inclined orbit at theta, I saw books. There's a lot of books here. I wrote a little note. Sometimes I have a tape recorder and I'll go with books and then go back down. And then I went down and I awoke to find myself standing in front of a plaque, a bronze metal plaque, which I reported. This target was really interesting because after I saw the plaque, I knew that I had caught a glimpse of a guy in a uniform that was a policeman. I knew there was a murder here, and some uniformed investigator had been stepping over boxes looking for things. The target was the plaque at the Texas School Book Depository at Dallas, Texas. When I had gone to S5 and had the experiential, I awoke and there was the plaque, and I knew it was a plaque. It's a bronze plaque. And I was looking at it as I'm looking at that speaker, and I tried to read the darn thing. Once you try to read, it kicked me right off target, and I woke up and I was in my room leaning back in a chair. I went, okay, it was a plaque. What did that thing say? Darn it, what was that? And it was like an alphabet I didn't know. So I just kind of scribbled this stuff. But that was an interesting target. Here's an operational target we worked, and again, in all of this work you see, the viewer is only given the target ID. Absolutely no front loading. This was for a client, and this may be published in a book. An author tasked this to us. Joe McMonigal also worked it. At one point, I found a closet with some suits, and I realized that there was a hidden safe underneath the closet. And I remember Glenn Wheaton, when he taught us priming and edging, said, you know, there'll come a day when there's a wall, and when you want to see what's on the other side of the wall, you can just look through it. So I did that. I looked in the safe, and I found all kinds of interesting things in there, keys and cards that were important, and some valuable coins, and a gun, and parchment, and legal documents. What this target involved was a condo association manager in a town in the Midwest that money was disappearing, and the books weren't right, and they wanted to know if was this guy stealing from them. And in S5, I saw a guy at a desk with two sets of books, a secret one and the public one. He had two ledgers. We submitted that, and I'm not sure, that might get published in the book at some point. Oh, we do some interesting targets at HRVG. This was one of our viewers, Valtra, and I saw a crop circle years back. This was in 1996, so I said, wonder what created that. So I tasked her, again, giving her only this target ID, and she had an interesting experience in S5, and here's what she reported. I experienced feelings of expansion and layering of consciousness, lots of tapping and gristling inside my head, tingling throughout my body. Words genetic transformation kept running through my head. Genetic fusion, then I had a flash of this image. Bright blue, gold, pink circle of energy with spiraling stream of golden white light pressing out of the center, and I kept getting chills running down through my body. And she drew this in the crop circle. That was something to consider. We do some non-validation targets once in a while. Here's a session that Deborah did. Deborah, who introduced me, who's sitting back there. Again, The only information the monitor has is data that she produced. There's no leading. The monitor has no idea and can only give her information that she's produced in the paper and pen part of her session. Now she kicks back in that inclined orbit at theta, and she describes stone. It's an enclosed area with tiles and mosaics and bones. So the viewer, Jason, and this is actual video from the session. We have this on DVD. He says, okay, move into the stone area and describe the bones. She goes back to that inclined orbit at theta, and she says, the bones belong to a man in his 30s. These bones are wrapped in cloth. When he was alive, he had dark skin. He wasn't an African black, but like a dark Eurasian. He was associated with an army. This man was some kind of warrior that had an army. He was a fighter. He had injured his leg, and the leg injury caused his death. And this was a historical target given by an outside tasker, and it was the tomb of Genghis Khan. So you can find some interesting historical data via remote viewing. Which brings us to Rose Kopp, Hawaii remote viewer and star of 2 programs on Court TV and the Biography channel. These still images I took from the video that just aired recently on the Biography channel. This lady was murdered in Gonzales, Louisiana. There were a number of elderly people that were being brutally murdered in their own homes. Lillian Philippe, a 77-year-old lady, was most brutally murdered. They didn't really have a clue who did it. The detectives had Rose work the session. And Rose went into our protocol methodology. She used our tools. And she gave them data that led directly to this man, Daniel Blank. And based on her data, he was arrested, convicted, and he sits now on death row in Louisiana. I wrote him a letter. I wanted to ask how he felt about having a remote viewer bust him, and his attorney wrote me back, said, why do you want... Attorney never panned out, but he's on death row. That's his interrogation. And this is the chief of Gonzales, Louisiana, Chief Bill Landry, the good old Southern boy. And he says on these programs, he credits Rose Kopp in her remote viewing for catching this criminal. Had she not done that session, this serial murder, he had moved out of Louisiana and had gone to Texas, and they had no idea where he was. And he may have started doing that again, but Rose caught him with remote viewing. So that's what's possible, and that's how we do it. The question is, what are we going to do with this? We're kind of a little bit scattered in the remote viewing community. We feel that this is an evolutionary step for humanity. Remote viewing is training it, getting it out to people. It's why Glenn Wheaton has been doing it for 10 years and has never accepted a penny for doing it, for teaching all those classes. So we need to take this and do something incredible with it, because we can. So we need to get together and get some groups and work some historical targets and work some missing person targets and do some work for the police and find out, what do you want to know? What do you want to know? I have a few minutes to take a few questions. Can we bring the lights up a little bit?
You work in pen and pencil. Why would you ever work in color?
I have worked in color. We work in pen and pencil because we've gotten in the habit of using a Uniball Vision fine or medium point pen. And I have worked some targets where I've seen brilliant color, and I've got a magic marker, and I have done some color. I should have brought some of those. That's a great question. Yeah, you can. There's no reason you can't. You see it in color.
In our study, shape was the most, long ago that we did. Shape was the most dominant similarity in color in the second.
I visited your site quite some time ago after I found out about it, and by the way, that was an amazing presentation too, just really wonderful. But I notice you all put up free targets, and I know there's others that do too, but they're very, very well done. You also, though, at the time I noticed, put up a video about Dr. Richard Ireland, which I don't think is there any longer.
That's linked on the PsyQuest website. It's psyquest.com, PSIQUEST, and you can watch Richard Ireland. There's some videos about him. You should watch this because he was on the Steve Allen show, and he just incredible.
That's what I was going to say. Steve Allen, of course, is a famous skeptic. You know, he's now deceased, but the things that Richard Ireland was able to do, I mean, when it comes to getting...
Yeah.
If you want to preserve yourself for posterity, you got to talk on the mic. Does this not work? No.
Well, you got to turn it on. Yeah.
See, I didn't preserve myself for posterity. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
The thing that, as I watched that, I mean, it looked like it was just a magician show. It was so unreal because he was so precise.
A showman. He was a showman, but he was also a genuine, incredible psychic. The Special Forces 10th Group tested him every which way. He was the real deal.
But when you watch, remote viewing is, you know, even Joe McMonagle and the best is like maybe 65%, supposedly. Richard Ireland in that show with Steve Allen was like 100%. He was totally taped up, his eyes, and he was picking up numbers, license tag, the information off dollar bills and so on. I just found that a bit unbelievable that it was that good. And so, but I guess I hear you saying that it is possible.
He did it. There's a video floating around, too, a DVD of Glenn working a target that is going to, it's been given to selected people, but it'll be floating around probably.
Like, one more quick question. Dispel a rumor or confirm it about Glenn. I shared a room with Wayne Carr, who's, I don't think he's here. He's also one of the presenters at some of the earlier conferences. Yeah. He followed Glenn around at one of the casinos, and he was amazed because Glenn was just, you know, really winning. And the rumor was that Glenn never bothers to bring his own money because he wins enough to pay for his trip from Hawaii.
That's true. He was banned from the casino at the Army base in Okinawa, and I've seen Glenn, well, we didn't do too shabby last night. We controlled the roulette wheel, and there is no randomness. You can control randomness. Glenn goes to slot machines and realizes that a slot machine is programmed to either be in a give mode or a take mode. A slot machine is either going to take your money or give your money. That's something you can probe. I'll see Glenn walk by and just touch a slot machine and go, this is a good one. And at the first conference in Mesquite, Nevada, we were walking in. Glenn had never been to Mesquite. I don't think he'd been to Vegas. And we're walking in, and he said, I need to find a slot machine with a bow tie. I said, bow tie? He said, yeah, a picture of a bow tie. And I said, did you remote? He said, yeah. He looked real quick. He looked on Blackboard with the intent of seeing the winning slot machine. What he saw on Blackboard, he said, was a motif of a top hat and black tie. Okay. So I went into the casino. We're checking in. And I see this like quarter machine. It's like called black tie. And the winning thing was 3 black ties. And I thought, that's amazing that he would even know without being here that there was a... Bing, 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 bing. I take about $150 out of the thing. I'm like, yeah. Went up to Glenn. I said, hey, Glenn, I found the black tie. He goes, how much did you win? I go, 150. And he said, it's the dollar machine. So he went and found the black tie, and he and my wife, and I have pictures of this, of their payoff. The thing just threw money out of that thing. Enough to pay his ticket here in his hotel. He's always, it's an amazing thing to watch, but he worked what he calls an entrainment. We rehearsed this. we rehearsed it for the past month. What we did at the casino, we rehearsed. We knew what we were going to do. We had a definite plan, and it worked. Okay.
In your area of precog, your experience with precog, have you been able to change that precog vision?
Haven't tried to do that. I have a number of, everybody has their own skills. One of my little skills is I'm pretty good at, I said, I play around on Blackboard sometimes. I just play around just doing what I call priming, just to see what's here. I saw a DC-9 crashing, an MD-80 twin engine. Whew. I tasked that as a target and had the viewers work it and had analysis done. With some sense of urgency, I woke up before work at 6 in the morning and sent it to the webmaster and said, publish this. And he published it at 8:30 a.m. And 2 hours later, a DC-9 crashed. But we haven't tried precog. What we're working on currently, and this might be a presentation that Glenn would give a year or two from now. He's trying to send a message to the past. Okay, work a target, get a hold on that target, go back and create an entrainment, and use the observer's effect. This is something you can talk to him about in the hall. To put a message at the target site in the past that will show up now. So a picture or a reference in a magazine. It's very complex, but very interesting. That's the kind of stuff we're working on.
No, because the paradox becomes if you remote viewed something that was going to happen in the future and you changed it, then it wouldn't have been a remote view which would have led you to change it. So I'm just curious if there's a way to do that. Otherwise, the only thing you can avoid is not being on that DC-9.
Yeah. Most of our work has been in trying to send a message to the past that shows up here. But if you send that message to the past, it was always there.
Yeah.
That's the way it was.
No, I was just curious.
It boggles my mind. This is the reason. See, I got remote viewing down a few years ago, and I can do a session. What I'm interested in now, and these are the questions that we're at the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild that we're working on right now. And it's I come out of class sometimes just like it's a little above me actually. I'm pretty smart, but I'm not that smart.
No, but it's a heavy thought. I mean, it really creates a no-win answer. I don't know what the solution is.
What is time?
Conscious awareness.
Well, time is consciousness observing, and consciousness isn't limited by time. So.
Right here.
I think we have time for maybe one more, then we've got to get the show on the road.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
What kind of databasing have you got? How do you know who's good in what? Some people missing persons or whatever, archaeological stuff.
Oh boy, Glenn is moving to a new house, and they just packed up all our files. It was filing cabinets that would fill this stage. We have everything every viewer's ever done. Everything every viewer does. That's the rule at the Guild, is Glenn gets it. When we work an operational target, a blind analyst then gets the feedback and judges the data as to whether it's congruent or not and gives them a hit or miss. And we have a good viewer on a good operational session that's had a 98% accuracy rating. Some are 60. But we have ways of doing that. Thank you.